Hi everyone, welcome to Sunny Day Discussions. I am Sunny Day. There's several things I want to go over today. So let's start with the fact that I just found out, and you guys might already know this, that in 2021, the Department of Justice started an election threat task force to combat the growing trend of violent threats against election workers. To date, the DOJ has charged 14 cases and secured 9 different convictions. Some of the examples of that are an Iowa man was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison for sending threatening communications to an election official on the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors and to the then Attorney General of Arizona. A Texas man pled guilty to posting a message riddled with graphic threats aimed at 2 Georgia officials. An Ohio man pleaded guilty to sending a death threat to an election official with the Arizona Secretary of State's office, and a Texas man was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison for threats made to an official in the Maricopa County Attorney's Office and other Maricopa County officials. Now, I want to go over some of the problems that America is facing that kind of came about as a result of the GOP's embrace of Reagan-era policies. Healthcare, education, that kind of a thing. So 30 million Americans lack health insurance altogether. 43% of Americans are so uninsured or underinsured that any illness or accident that costs more than $1,000 will wipe them out completely. Over 37% live in poverty. 12% live in dire poverty. More than 1 in 5 Americans are illiterate by the 4th grade. Only 35% of kids are literate at grade level as a result of a decades-long attack by the GOP against public education on the state and federal levels. 26% of Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental illness. 54% never get treatment due to cost and lack of access to health care. Of the 46% who do receive treatment, the average time from onset of symptoms to the first treatment is 11 years. Every day in America, 316 people are shot and 110 die from gun violence, from their wounds. Gun violence is the leading cause of death in the U.S., only in the U.S. We spend twice as much on healthcare as any other country in the world, and yet we don't have better healthcare outcomes. We have a shorter life expectancy than comparative countries. And yet the GOP thinks that the most important issues facing us today are banning the teaching of Black history, calling it critical race theory, and that trans kids want to be recognized for who they are. This is apparently what the GOP sees as the biggest challenge to our country. Not the illiteracy, not the lack of health care, not the lack of mental health care, but teaching about Black history and the acceptance of trans kids. Now, we also have a billionaire problem and a bribery problem in America. Reagan dropped the top income tax bracket for the ultra-wealthy from 74% to 25%. Then a year later, he had to increase it again because the deficit just skyrocketed. So he increased it to 27%. Then the GOP put so many loopholes in the IRS tax code that the average billionaire now only pays 3.4% income tax, and some have paid nothing for decades. As a result, we are the most financially unequal society in the world. $51 trillion has left the pockets of the working class Americans and gone into the coffers of billionaires. A conservative Supreme Court essentially legalized political bribery, allowing billionaires to buy politicians, and enact an agenda that would benefit those billionaires. A couple of years ago, Pelosi put forth a bill called the For the People Act. And it would have limited big money in politics and would have restored political bribery laws. But the GOP, along with, of course, Manchin and Sinema, kind of put a stop to that, kibosh to that. So why are right-wing billionaires funding groups and politicians who are trying to end the teaching of Black history and ruin the lives of trans people? I think it's just to keep us fighting with each other, to keep us distracted, so that they can continue to prosper and benefit on the backs of the working class. So we know pretty much what the GOP has been doing at the federal level corruption-wise. Let's take a look at some of the state level GOP houses. We've all heard, I'm assuming that we've all heard that Alabama, their district maps that were drawn were ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court because it would basically eliminate an entire majority Black district. In essence, canceling out and negating the votes for those people. So the Supreme Court ruled that they needed to redo it. Well, Alabama was like, I don't care. We're going to just draw the maps the way we want them so that we can gain control and continue to have control. Well, then a federal court had to say, well, we can't trust you, obviously, to do what the court's directed. So we're going to have to hire a topographer to do the redistricting for you because you're obviously untrustworthy. Their desire to maintain their perceived power outweighs even edicts by the far-right conservative Supreme Court. Now, let's move on to Tennessee now. According to Representative Gloria Johnson, she was a member of what is now known as the Tennessee Three, the two Justins and her who were standing up for gun control legislation, basically, stricter gun laws. And the two Black men, Justin Pearson and Justin Jones, were ousted, basically. Yeah, luckily they were voted back in by large majorities, but the one white lady was not. But there is a whole slew of corruption and just bad behavior on the part of the GOP in Tennessee. Gloria Johnson, according to Gloria Johnson, she stated that a GOP senator has told Justin Jones that he wasn't worthy to be there and hold the office that he holds. And another member, Sapiki, I think she said it was, has said something to the effect of, I can't stand that he is walking in these hallowed halls. The GOP regularly threatens the two Justins in elevators. They have tried to use force to keep members in the chamber from leaving the chamber. They make fun of Representative Johnson for occasionally using a scooter. They tried to ban signs bigger than 8 by 11. The courts did overturn that because it's obviously a violation of the First Amendment, yet the GOP then appealed because they definitely wanted the silencing of the dissent. And of course, they were told, you still can't do it. Representative Paul Sherrill a while back asked if the state would consider hanging by a tree. And then when faced with backlash from that comment, of course, claimed it was just a joke. Not funny. And I don't think it was a joke. Now let's go on to Wisconsin. The GOP have a supermajority in Wisconsin, all due to gerrymandering and illegal maps. Now, in Wisconsin, they elect their Supreme Court justices, and they elected a Democratic justice. And of course, because they're elected, they have to campaign on something, right? So she was campaigned on saying that we need to relook at the district lines because I think they might be unfairly gerrymandered. That was what she ran on. Let's relook at these things. Let's look at them and make sure that they're fair and just. Well, because the GOP didn't like the fact that, for one, a Democrat was elected and gave the Supreme Court a Democratic majority, but the thought that their district maps would be redrawn, possibly giving Democrats more power in the state legislature, is just unconscionable to them. So they are trying to say that this justice, I think her name is Janet Protasiewicz, that she needs to recuse herself from any cases involving redistricting, because she has said and prejudged the cases already by her statements that they need to be relooked at. But she did not promise anything in her campaigning. She just said that it needs to be looked at because she believes that there is probably some illegal gerrymandering going on. So they have also said that if she refuses to recuse herself from these cases, that they will look at impeachment. And unfortunately, because they hold a supermajority due to their gerrymandered maps, they probably have the votes to do it. So they're just pissy that they're being called out on their shit, and they're pissy at the thought that they could possibly lose the power that they have gained by their illegal gerrymandering. So now I want to talk about a presidential candidate that Democratic media does not have on. They don't talk about her. They make fun of her. And Fox News has had her on far more than anyone like on CNN or MSNBC. And that, as you probably have guessed, is Marianne Williamson. And the reason I want to talk about her is because when she ran in 2020, I didn't think she was ready. She didn't seem like she held her opinions strongly, you know. She seemed like she was kind of wishy-washy on things. But this time I think she's ready. And she wants to bring back something or instate something that I think is brilliant. You know, FDR had a secondary Bill of Rights. Well, she wants to implement a secondary Bill of Rights for the 21st century. And in that Bill of Rights, she would include the right to a job that pays a living wage, the right to a voice in the workplace through a union and collective bargaining, the right to universal quality health care, the right to a cost-free higher education, the right to good affordable housing, the right to a clean environment and a healthy planet, the right to a meaningful endowment of resources at birth, the right to sound banking and financial services, the right to an equitable and fair justice system, and the right to cultural and civic involvement in democratic life. And I just think that's brilliant, and we need to talk about her more, and she needs to be put out there so that people know that there is that option, because her policies are a far cry from Biden's lies. Yes, I voted for him, but it wasn't a vote for him, it was a vote against Trump. Now, during Biden's campaign, he promised that he would take strong action to combat this climate crisis that we're in. But as the world faces extreme heat waves, and the Biden DOJ has argued that there is no constitutional right to a stable environment, or to a stable climate. They went on to argue that because the harmful effects of climate crisis are so generalized that the Supreme Court could not recognize the rights of individuals facing its impacts. Now, the Biden administration claimed this in a court filing seeking to get a landmark youth climate lawsuit, Juliana v. the United States, dismissed. Juliana v. U.S. was filed in 2015 by 21 young plaintiffs seeking to establish a constitutional guarantee to a livable climate. In June, a federal judge ruled that that case could go to trial. This ruling allowed the plaintiffs to amend the complaint to remove a request for a change in federal policy. And in her decision, District Court Judge Ann Eileen Aiken, sorry, I can't read my own handwriting, wrote, quote, "It is foundational doctrine that when government conduct catastrophically harms American citizens, the judiciary is constitutionally required to perform its independent role and determine whether the challenged conduct, not exclusively committed to any branch by the Constitution, is unconstitutional." Now, the landmark win in Montana that was along the same lines, the youth sued the state for violating their constitutional right to a clean environment and won. And so I think that case will help bolster this case as well. Now, this is just the latest example of the Biden administration refusing to act on the climate crisis. Like I said, during his campaign, he promised bold action to combat the climate change. But federal data shows that the Biden administration has approved 6,430 new permits for oil and gas drilling on public lands in its first 2 years. Now, this is outpacing the Trump administration's 6,172 permit approvals in its first 2 years. So this policy of fossil fuel expansion contradicts the clear climate science that fossil fuel growth must be stopped. It is obviously a clear failure of leadership by the Biden administration. In fact, at the COP26 summit in Glasgow, Biden called climate change an existential threat to human existence and pledged to cut U.S. emissions by up to 51% over the next 9 years. Days later, he offered 80 million acres in the Gulf of Mexico for oil and gas leasing and has since expanded oil and gas leasing onshore. Now, I have to admit that the Biden administration has surprised me pleasantly in some ways. But he is still just a politician. And they say things to get elected. And when they get elected, they change their mind. Like Obama ran on codifying Roe v. Wade. And then he got into office and was like, well, it's not really a priority. Well, because of that decision, we now have states where abortion is illegal in all forms. And states where it's illegal after 6 weeks when most women don't know they're pregnant. So that is another just standard politician maneuver to say, hey, I'm going to do what you guys want. But once we elect them, that's the end of that, because then they realize that they're in it for themselves, for their own benefits, and for the major corporations. So it's just infuriating to watch as our entire world is on fire. Hurricanes hitting places that don't normally get hit because the temperatures of the ocean are hot. And to have politicians lying to us, consistently saying that they believe that we need to do something dramatic to combat this, while going behind closed doors and basically negating any little bit of improvement that they managed to do in their tenure. It's like Biden approving the Willow Project by approving Manchin's pipeline. He is being more detrimental to the environment than maybe even Trump. And if he doesn't do something, we as a people need to vote him out of office. Now, I know it's probably going to be down to Biden and Trump in 2024, and Biden will probably get reelected because no one's going to vote for Trump. But we need to hold his feet to the fire. And we need to make him listen. And I don't know how. I mean, we've protested. There's been demonstrations, movements. Politicians just don't listen to us anymore. And so we need to vote in people who do. People who take this threat seriously, who take the threat of gun violence seriously, who listen to the constituents and actually want to do something to improve their lives. Because our current politicians, the majority of them, don't give a damn. So vote. Vote no matter how big, how small, how inconsequential your vote matters, and read. Everything you can get your hands on. Read legislation, read policies, because politicians will spin and they will lie. And we need to be informed and aware. So I thank you, and I hope I'll see you next time.